Welcome to my website, Natural Disasters, Science, and the Role of Government, also known as HeyFloodGuy.com. In this video, I'm going to discuss my work background as a hydraulic engineer as it relates to natural disasters and my roles in trying to protect and restore communities after they are hit by disasters. By highlighting some of this work, I feel there are some topics and examples that we can talk in more depth to learn about best practices and also what we can improve upon. This presentation is going to highlight my work history that related to natural disasters. So I'm going to focus on my experiences shown in orange with the Army Corps of Engineers from 2000 to 2009 and with the Federal Emergency Management Agency from 2009 to 2025. For my work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's a lot of work we did that was related to preventing flood damages that I discuss in a separate presentation. But this presentation is about what things happen when natural disasters occur, so I'm going to focus on my role as dam regulator in the Reservoir Control Center during my time there. The Seattle district that I was in managed 5 dams and 1 locks. My role there was as a dam regulator. This meant that it was my role to determine how much water to hold back and then release from the dams throughout the year, and particularly when large floods were predicted for the basins and that the dams were regulating. A secondary role was to monitor all of the basins in our district to help inform the flood teams that the Corps had on what the potential flooding situation was in the basins across the district. All of the dams the Seattle district regulated were on the west side of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. The extreme events in this area are driven by atmospheric rivers, which is a large plume of water being pulled in from the tropics when a low pressure system sets up in the Pacific Northwest. This figure is showing this with the yellow and green colors being into this area. During the time I was at the Seattle district from 2000 to 2009, there were a number of large flood events that hit this area. On the west side of the Cascades, just looking at the gauges that had a long historic record, 50 years of stream gauge records or more, there are 32 stream gauges that match that criteria. Of the 32 flood gauges that USGS has monitored over that length of time, the river saw 18 floods of record from 2000 to 2009, including at or near record inflows to all the dams. This led to some unique experiences and challenges that can be important to learn from. Adding in the 1990 to 2000 timeframe, and it appears that our understanding of risk has changed if we base our understanding of the future on the past records that we have. But is that a decadal variation as the last 15 years have been a lot quieter, or is it a bigger fingerprint of climate change? There are also stories from the past we need to better understand. This is a chart showing the peak flows on the Skagit River that show very large flood events in 1815 and 1856 that dwarf those in the recent record. There's a similar event like this on the Willamette River in 1861, and an even more extreme event, possibly the greatest observable series of atmospheric river events on the Sacramento River, also in 1861. What made these end up being on a different scale than what we have more recently observed, and how do we prepare for that? Atmospheric rivers are just one source of flooding, though. If we can determine the patterns and how they are affected by climate changes, how does that change for flooding from snowmelt primarily, or thunderstorms, or other sources? There is interesting research into these topics, and it's important to understand this on the detailed scale to truly grasp what we can do to control the impacts. There's a thunderstorm event in 1903 on Willow Creek at Heppner, Oregon that hit 36,000 cubic feet per second of flow, yet we have not observed anything above 1,700 cubic feet per second since then. What can we learn from that? Not just for this location, but also regionally. So it's these types of discussions that I wanted to dive deeper with communities, and that led me to FEMA. My primary role was to oversee flood studies we did to support the National Flood Insurance Program with a team that worked with communities to reduce their exposure to natural hazard risks. Other roles included supporting the state's role with dam safety by providing grants to support their efforts to inspect dams, develop emergency action plans in case of dam failure, and help rehabilitate dams that are in poor condition. And then there are the efforts to support disaster response and recovery, which is the focus of this presentation. The area I covered was Region 10 that included Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Before I get into the weeds of these disasters, I feel there's often a misperception of what FEMA's role is in disasters and what their authorities are, so I wanted to provide an overview of that first for context. I'm going to simplify some things and some of this process may be changing, so this is just to provide a basic understanding of how things have worked in the past from my perspective. When it comes to disasters, the first responders are always the local community. Think your local fire or police personnel. When it overwhelms their capabilities, they often reach out to the next level up, which can be the county or the state. Only when the state is not able to meet the needs does the reach get to the FEMA level. The first priority when a disaster strikes is always the life-saving efforts, so there is the ability for the president to sign an emergency declaration for these types of efforts effective immediately. This is the first thing that is under the president's discretion to declare or not declare. Once the disaster is hit, FEMA has rapidly deployable emergency response teams called Incident Management Assistance Teams. Those teams can deploy within 2 hours and arrive at an incident within 12 hours to support the local incident commander of the disaster, which can be the local community or anywhere up to the state level. The teams support the initial establishment of a unified command and provide situational awareness for federal and state decision makers, crucial to determining the level and type of immediate federal support that may be required. Part of this effort are things like developing damage assessments that help determine where the disaster warrants a major disaster declaration asked from the state governor to the president. If a major disaster declaration is made by the president, the next decision is whether the assistance will be public assistance only or both public and individual assistance. The public assistance is all about helping the community get back to functioning as it was before the event. This can be emergency protective measures, removing debris, restoring publicly owned facilities, while also encouraging efforts to build back in ways that don't cause the same impacts with the next event. Individual assistance provides help more on the individual level in the forms of housing assistance, low-interest loans, and some funds to recover from. But individual assistance is only included for events that cause large-scale individual impacts. Most disasters in Region 10 did not meet that threshold, so did not have that element to them. Even when individual assistance is declared, the amounts given are far short of what a person has actually lost, and it is nothing like actually having insurance coverage for the specific disaster type. This is how the laws are written and how they are implemented, which can seem very unfulfilling from those impacted's viewpoint. While I've done some individual assistance for large events, the focus of my work has always been on the public assistance side of things, and so that is what I want to introduce as topics for the website. I'm going to quickly go through some of the disasters during my tenure so you can get a feel for how a flood engineer is involved in the support. In 2012, Super Typhoon Samba remnants were brought into the jet stream towards Alaska and caused significant flooding in the Kenai Peninsula and Matanuska-Susitna boroughs. Once this event hit, it was then necessary to capture the data behind how the storm impacted the communities. This was done by looking at how likely was that event to have occurred when one looks at the historical stream flow and precipitation records. As an example, if a stream gauge showed a flow that was higher than had ever been observed and that gauge had 100 years of record, it is likely only to have a 1% probability or less of occurring in any given year. If the stream had seen 10 stream flows at or greater than that event in 100 years, then the probability is closer to 10%. So those are the analyses I did for all of the stream flow and rainfall gauges in the area. I then projected those flood frequencies out to the entire basin, so when the recovery work was being evaluated, they had a basis to determine the benefit of the fix versus the cost based on an annual occurrence. As an example, if the flooding was extreme and rarely got to that level, sometimes building back to the way it was can be okay. But if the damages are seen to an area that sees these types of events regularly, one likely wants to consider improving what is being restored. In 2013, a large ice jam formed on the Yukon River in the vicinity of the town of Galena. This event was close to the largest event observed there, and the previous flood analysis did not factor in ice jams in determining what to build to. As part of this recovery effort, we developed flood maps that determine the height and extent of a 1% probability, also known as the 100-year event, so the community knew what to build back to keep them safer from future flood events. In 2014, a large mudslide occurred near Oso, Washington that killed 43 people in its path, and it also blocked the North Fork Stillaguamish River from flowing the way it normally did and flooded out people upstream. This is what the ground topography looked like before the slide. This is what it looked like after. This topography was used to build models of the river so we could determine what the floodplain looked like before, how it changed, what we could do to return it to a more normal condition, while also needing to look at the impacts of the sediment moving downstream, possibly filling the channel and causing flooding elsewhere in a variety of different scenarios. That was my focus. There were many scientists working on this disaster, helping to determine any additional risks the landslide posed, informing where to focus the immediate life safety and then body recovery work, as well as informing a number of other related response and recovery tasks. There have been many large wildfires over the 15 years in our region. In 2014, there was the largest wildfire in Washington state history with a Carlton Complex fire. It was 256,000 acres. It was then exceeded in 2015 by the Okanagan Complex fire. Oregon has had large wildfires over the past decade or so, particularly 2012, 2020, and 2024, all with over 1 million acres burned during those years. These fires can greatly alter whether rainfall can infiltrate into the ground, particularly where the burning is severe. It acts more like pavement, so analysis is first done to the burn severity throughout the basin seen from the wildfire. Models are then run to see how much more runoff may come from the basin until the basin heals, which can be 5 to 10 years. In this case, on the lower Loop Loop River, the 1% chance flow, the 100-year flood, would increase from 1840 cubic feet per second to 4,358. So that more than doubled the flow in the changed condition post-fire. From there, we look at how that increased flow will affect the developed world downstream from these areas and see what can be done to address that increased risk. Then there's the 2018 Anchorage earthquake, where I know a lot of work was done evaluating the building codes that were in place and how those could be improved. I was mostly just involved in the situational awareness part at the very beginning when it first hit, but earthquakes can have wide-ranging impacts to the changes in the topography from an event. In November 2021, there was a flood event on the upper Nooksack River and its flow path into Canada near Abbotsford that resembled the 1% flood event. We had already been working with the communities there to improve their flood maps, so there have been some hard conversations there on the best path to long-term recovery. In September 2022, Typhoon Merbok hit western Alaska. This greatly impacted many Alaskan Native villages in this area. This event occurred before the usual freeze up of the Bering Sea, which makes the coastal storm stronger, near record storm surge, which basically is longer fetch for the storm to come in on. And with permafrost degradation happening more often, the land is more erodible than it once was. On the Mendenhall River, there has been increased flood risk due to glacial outburst flooding from the Mendenhall Glacier. This is where melting of the glacier forms a pool within the glacier that gradually opens up and releases large amounts of water downstream. This impacts the city of Juneau, Alaska. While the first observed event was in 2011, the last couple of years have resulted in releases that have greatly exceeded what has been observed before. USGS, the Weather Service, the University of Alaska, and others have all been working to help the community better understand these risks. So that is a bit about the disasters I have been involved with in my tenure. Plenty of topics there to dig into. Do you have things you want to discuss? Click on the blog section and join the chat. The goal is to learn about all that is out there on science related to the natural world and how we can make things better from that knowledge. So the website again is heyfloodguy.com, and so thank you again for listening.